The following is a clip from PRIMO RADICAL UNCENSORED. To see the full interview, please go to rockfin.com/PRIMO RADICAL and sign up to become a premium member.
That was, a sign of how things were going with the Democratic Party at the time. And they've just gotten worse. And I think it's become very blatant and very obvious that they are as corrupt as the Republicans. And when it comes to foreign policy, they've never been significantly better on foreign policy. I mean,
well, they used to pretend to be, right? Because in the Iraq War protests, those kind of evolved into Democratic campaigns. Democrats started showing up at those anti-war protests in 2006. The blue wave that when they overtook Congress, that was really running against the Iraq War and against the Bush regime overall. And I think that was on that momentum that Barack Obama got elected. But it seems like through the course of the Obama administration, that just got thrown by the wayside, and they just continued on with. Effectively today, I think they're basically running on a neoconservative foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, Biden has just invaded Somalia. Why are we doing that? Somalia has oil. Why did we invade Iraq? Iraq has oil. Now that was a Republican, yes, but that war at the time, and I lived through this in real time, had so many cheerleaders on the Democratic side of the aisle, including Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton. There were voices saying this is not right. Mike Gravel and Paul Wellstone, and there were voices in the Democratic Party, which thank God there were some. I mean, that's good, but they're still always behind the base. I think always more hawkish than their electorate. I don't think they're representative. The Democratic Party, was involved in ramping up our war in Vietnam. I mean, it goes back. But
there always, it seems like there always was some dissent, right? Like there was Gene McCarthy, or Robert Kennedy, or George McGovern, and I think in the mid 2000s, whether they even believed it or not, they ran to some degree on being anti-war, or at least more dovish than the Bush administration. What I see now, specifically with Russia, it seems as though, I don't know if this is because of Trump and the years of Russiagate claims, but it seems to me as though Democrats are more hawkish and more neoconservative in foreign policy terms than the Republican Party. And I think one example of that is the $40 billion of aid that was just passed. That actually, I believe Rosa DeLauro was the one who introduced that in the House of Representatives. And there was not one single Democrat in the House who voted against it. And it appears as though there's not one Democratic senator. I don't believe any senator besides Rand Paul who's against it in the Senate. So again, it seems as though, as you mentioned, all the Mike Gravells are gone, all the Dennis Kuciniches are gone, all the Tulsi Gabbards are gone. There's not anybody who's even really remotely dovish in the Democratic Party anymore.
Yeah, I'm so frustrated and disappointed with the party, and there's the squad that people put a lot of hope in, and they're all voting for the $40 billion. I don't think they're really part of the movement. I mean, and they get they get co-opted. There's pressure when you're in that party, and I mean they have more power than they would otherwise if they hadn't been elected. But there's pressure against them to use it, and I really like being in a party now that believes what I believe from top to bottom. Like the platform and my beliefs are in accordance. Single payer, peace. Ukraine. It is sad that we're getting outflanked on peace by some of the right wing at this point, and the libertarians. The Ukraine situation. Unfortunately, we don't get the full story. Most people don't get the full backstory. You hear all of a sudden, oh, there's a war, and we don't really get Why is this happening? We don't really get and the story we do get is polished and pushed in a certain direction. The truth about Ukraine is that they had democracy, and there was a revolution, a non-democratic revolution, an ouster of the democratically elected president in 2014. So Ukraine, West has more pro-Europe feelings. The East has more pro-Russia feelings and more Russian-speaking people. They've always been somewhat of they're a somewhat divided country politically. They have close elections. We can relate to that. In 2010, they had a close election. It was deemed by outside observers to be free and fair, and Yanukovych won that election. And he, largely with the support of Eastern Ukrainians in the Donbass region and Crimea, and he was president for 4 years. And no major alarm bells going off, and he was going to be up for re-election, right? Democracy was working. They had contentious issues, right? The West wants to join the European Union in a trade deal, and the East doesn't like this deal because it's going to impact their trade with Russia, from which they make a lot of their livelihood. These things come down to economics more than they come down to ideology, but a lot of the tensions come down to, is this going to be a good deal for my community economically? And so joining this European trade deal was legitimately controversial in Ukraine, and people want to paint Yanukovych as just being a puppet of Russia and doing whatever Russia wants. He's a democratically elected president, and the people who elected him were not fans of this trade deal. So the people in the West, they wanted it. So when Yanukovych said, I don't want this trade deal, and he said, nah, I'm not going to do it, a lot of people in the West were upset. Okay, they protested. Great, they had a peaceful protest. But it spiraled out of control. And it spiraled out of control in 2013, 2014, largely with Western support. Going in there with money, logistical support. I mean, John McCain and our own senator, Chris Murphy, going over there and standing on the stage,
right,
and saying, yes, 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 this president must go. That's not supporting democracy, right? That is the crowd is demanding that a president step down outside the constitutional process.
I mean, it's quite ironic too if you think about it, because I'm sure Chris Murphy is in favor of the January 6th protesters being prosecuted, but he participated in effectively a January 6th with the Euromaidan protest.
Yeah, I've made the same point, and because their Maidan revolution has a lot of parallels to the January 6th revolution. It's saying we don't accept the outcome of the election. It's kind of the same thing. It's saying we're not happy with this president who has been fairly elected. We demand a different president. And we supported that. We supported an unconstitutional ouster of their president. And as a result, everybody on the eastern side of Ukraine was immediately disenfranchised. They were, their vote suddenly doesn't matter. And now, the new government is outlawing Russian, or taking it out as a state language, and signing the EU trade deal. But it's not just about language, it's about livelihood. These people were voters, they voted, they were Ukrainian, this was their representative, and he got pushed out in a violent ouster. And the violence was escalated by a lot of far-right nationalists who are in Ukraine, and there is a history of Nazi. If you look into it, there's a history of Nazi nationalists in Ukraine who don't like Russia, who were collaborators with the Nazis in World War II, and who's it? Stefan Bandera was one of the leaders who, led pogroms and killed Jews and Poles, and did ethnic cleansing in World War II, collaborated with the Nazis, and you see some Ukrainians with his picture on the wall, right? You've probably seen that. So anyway, but the bottom line is, democracy was working to resolve, was working to keep the peace, which is what democracy is for, right? People are going to have differences. People are going to want this or that. But you either believe in democracy and let it work, and wait till the next election. If the West wants this EU trade deal, try and get somebody elected president who supports that position.
Well, I mean, you could also make the argument that that's not really proper either, right? I mean, it's us interfering in Ukraine's election in much the way that we complain about Russia allegedly interfering in 2016.
I don't mean the West like us. I mean Western Ukraine.
Gotcha.
Yeah. No, they should be self-determining. We should not be involved in there, but we are. And it's all kinds of, the National Endowment for Democracy and the IMF and things that put pressure on. And we are so heavily invested in affecting the outcomes of other countries' elections all over the world. And that, so it is very hypocritical when we complain that, Russia puts some memes on the internet that that are tipping the election, and we have to spend all this time investigating what happened when we ourselves pour, millions, billions of dollars into affecting the outcome of elections. And Ukraine is one of the places we did that.
I mean, you could even go back and make the argument that Vladimir Putin wouldn't even be president of Russia right now if it weren't for us interfering in Russia's 96 election, because Yeltsin was probably going to lose to the communist candidate, but we didn't want the communists to come to power again, so we interfered on his behalf, and he effectively paved the way for Putin to be a successor.
I mean, yeah. It's a chess game. They think they know what they're doing. They think they're going to make things play out for the best, but what are they... And people are really just pawns in the game, and they don't care. I mean, this war shouldn't have happened, and I think could have been avoided if we'd let democracy function. And there's just... And what is the motivation of the foreign policy establishment when they're making all these decisions and picking sides and picking favorites? It's not democracy. It's not human welfare. It's U.S. interests, which is a euphemistic term for economic interests. It always comes back to why did we fight the Spanish in the Spanish-American War? Why did we take over the Philippines? So we could protect our shipping routes, so our Navy would have ports and naval bases in the Pacific, so we could protect our shipping routes to Asia. It always comes back to economic strategy.
And again, the sad thing from my perspective is I feel as though during the Bush administration, a lot of Democrats understood this. And I think that a lot of people would reference the fact, for example, that the U.S. effectively created the Mujahideen, created Al-Qaeda and the Taliban by funding the Mujahideen in the 70s and 80s. And I think that wasn't that controversial of a thing to say in the Democratic Party in the mid-2000s. And there was this critique of neoconservatism and the terminology that we would use of we're fighting for freedom and democracy, and this is between good and evil. It feels as though all of that really got repackaged and rebranded, and progressives and the Democratic Party have really embraced those same things, but now in contrast to Russia. And again, I don't know if it's specifically the 2016 election and the years of claiming that Donald Trump was elected because of Russia, that's what caused that embrace of, again, what I would call neoconservatism in the Democratic Party. But again, it's weird to me where this party that used to, at least, to some degree, be somewhat dovish has now just, again, they become more rabidly hawkish than the Republicans, where there are some dissenting voices in the Republican Party. It's not the majority, but there's some, there's some Rand Pauls, but there's not any. Again, there's no Tulsi Gabbard, there's no Dennis Kucinich, there's no Mike Gravel, there's no Dove in Congress amongst the Democrats.
Yeah. And
including even among Bernie Sanders, who was the victim of these Russiagate claims. Like, he was specifically charged with being effectively a Russian puppet, and he still seemingly goes along with it and quotes John McCain on the Senate floor.
And it is sad, and not entirely coincidence. I think that all the Democrats' solution, everyone's solution to this war is put weapons in, spend money that will go to mostly to American defense contractors, so they can flood Ukraine with weapons, and let's fight this out. And if that's your idea of how we're gonna, what needs to happen, you're basically condemning a lot of people to violent death, because you're prolonging this war. And what people should be screaming for is peace settlement. Because even Zelensky said, all wars end with an agreement. So what's the agreement going to be? That's what we should be talking about. But people are happy to kind of ignore that. Because it's easy to get people on the bandwagon, unfortunately, like rah rah rah, fight, stand with Ukraine.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, there's like 2 houses within a couple blocks of here that have Ukrainian flags up.
And they mean well. We're lacking leadership. People are being told this is what the good thing to do is to support the Ukrainian fight. And so people want to be good, and so they don't know the whole history there. Look, this could have been avoided with democracy in the first place, but now, there needs to be a peace settlement. Who's going to control which regions? There's been a war going since Maidan, in 2014.
Right, and we didn't hear about that. The corporate media in the U.S. never reported that, hey, the Donbass has been getting shelled year after year, and we're supporting it, we're funding it.
Yeah, there's been a civil war essentially in Ukraine since 2014, 8 years. And so, and there was the proposal of the Minsk Accords that would have ended the war. Now, this is just an escalation of a war that started in 2014. It's not out of nowhere. It's this war. Tens of thousands of people already died before this new phase of the war.
And again, with U.S. funding and with U.S. arms and U.S. training, like we were essentially backing and funding the Azov Battalion since 2014. And really, I think you could trace the whole thing back again to the Bush administration, because it was the Bush administration in 2008 that announced at the Bucharest summit that we wanted Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. And it seems as though ever since then, we were just pushing for it, or at least to cause some tensions in the region. And I think that people knew this in Washington, right? Like there's a clip of Joe Biden from 1997 where he said, the thing that would destroy our relations with Russia is if we pushed for NATO expansion. And like that's specifically what we did. So it just begs the question, are they doing this on purpose? Is this to enrich Raytheon and Lockheed, so they can build more ICBMs? Like what is the point of instigating all of this?
The economic interests are complex. We have big companies that sell, energy or sell hamburgers. We have all kinds of interests, and unfortunately, it always seems like they are what's pushing our foreign policy. We want open markets. We want to be able to invest. A lot of it often comes back to oil. There is oil in Ukraine. There is shale oil that was fairly recently discovered. And there's some in the east, there's some in the west. But we're never given, I think, the real explanations. We're always told, we got to fight for democracy here, or these people are being oppressed here or there. But we're not given the real story. And the people in a party that is kind of in on this, it is good that you can't have dissenting voices, but they're not at home in a party that's embracing those voices.
Well, again, I don't think there is one. There's Jeff Young, actually. He just won a Democratic primary in Kentucky, and he's outspoken on these issues. But there's no elected. Like again, I don't hear Bernie Sanders or AOC or anybody in the squad or Ro Khanna. And Ro Khanna actually previously was against sending money to the Azov battalion, but it seems as though he's completely turned around on that. And like the squad also, I think at the beginning of this conflict may have been a little ambivalent about our participation and funding Ukraine, but now again they're just all full-throatedly in support of it seems.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe they are in part responding to public opinion, which is unfortunately misinformed and not given the full story. And I did an interview with a YouTuber about a month ago that got pulled. Someone complained and said it had misinformation.
I've had 3 different videos removed as misinformation in the past 5 months.
Yeah, and I don't know what if you've ever been able to resolve those.
No.
Because I don't know what I said. They don't bother to tell you. It's just you said something that they deem as misinformation. Mm-hmm. So Oliver Stone's Ukraine on Fire got pulled. Got pulled from, was it Netflix?
It was off of YouTube for a while.
Or Tubi or YouTube. It got pulled for a while because it was misinformation. It's not a conspiracy. It happens. Things that free speech is important. You need a marketplace of ideas, and that's a whole problem I don't necessarily have a solution to. I don't think the government ministry of truth is the answer. That's not the answer.
We'll just announce yesterday that they paused it. I mean, I don't think they're actually... My perspective is a lot of the deplatforming and censorship that we're seeing, because it seems so coordinated, it probably is directed somehow by the federal government. I imagine they have some kind of, somebody at DHS or FBI or, I don't know, the White House somewhere is communicating with YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, saying, these are problematic posts. I think Jen Psaki even admitted to that during COVID, saying that the White House was flagging Facebook posts. So,
I don't know.
There's that whole dimension of it. They did announce yesterday, though, that they paused the government, the Disinformation Governance Board, and that Nina Jankowicz had resigned. But again, I still think that they're probably doing the same kind of censorship, just in different ways.
I think I don't know. And like Noam Chomsky said, in manufacturing consent, there's a whole problem of for-profit media ends up kind of being a mouthpiece for the establishment because of different conflicts of interests and so on, and that's always going to be a general problem. I do think, so it's refreshing when people can get out there like you're doing, and a lot of people are doing, getting out there and just having uninhibited conversations and exchanging ideas, but then they disappear, and
right.
you're powerless. It's really frustrating, and you don't know who's behind it. I mean, we can speculate, but it's a black box.
Right.
It doesn't feel like freedom, that's for sure.
Yeah, again, it's just from my perspective, it seems suspicious if you have somebody who's like kicked off of multiple different social media networks that are nominally competitors. Like you figure, like if that's my competitor and they got rid of this person, then I would want to have them on my platform so that I get more of their audience. But if it's like, hey, we're all going to kick off the same person at the same time, that seems to suggest that there's some kind of outside impetus there that's affecting that decision.
Could be, yeah. I mean, we saw who was it who lost their show during the Iraq War?
Phil Donahue.
Phil Donahue. The voices for peace get deplatformed, and no, I don't think it's a coincidence. And is it a conspiracy? I don't know. I think it's just people working towards interests, and
yeah, I mean, and again, I think there is like a public sentiment definitely is a part of that, and the public sentiment is unfortunately rapidly in favor of us supporting NATO, supporting Ukraine through NATO, through sending arms, and there was a lot of cries earlier for a no-fly zone. Thankfully, the Biden administration pushed back on that at the time. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of fervor out there. And again, it's really in the Democratic Party more so than the Republican Party. I mean, there are a lot of very hawkish Republicans. You know, Dan Crenshaw is insane, I would say. But, you know, the sentiment among the Democratic Party, and again, I think that you can trace this back to Russiagate, it is very rabidly in favor of, again, supporting Ukraine, especially through arms, and demonizing anyone who's, you know, has any kind of nuanced view. And it could be just, you know, not even, let's not send arms, it's, well, let's look at the history of how this happened. So I have to wonder, you know, as somebody who's running against a well-known, respected Democrat in a very blue district, and I don't even know how long Rose has been in office, probably 32 years. So again, like, I would imagine a lot of people are going to be demonizing you as, you know, a Russian asset or a Russian stooge because you're having an unconventional take on this, and you're running with the Green Party. We know how Jill Stein was demonized in 2016. Yeah. That was actually another thing Nina Jankowicz said effectively, is that Jill Stein was a Russian stooge because she had nuanced views on whatever. So again, like, how do you personally feel about that? Like, you're probably going, and I don't know if this happened to you in 2020, but I imagine it may have, but how do you feel about, especially in the context of what's happening with Ukraine, that you're going to just be demonized as a Russian agent?
Well, you know, these smears are a way of trying to influence voters that in a way that isn't really talking about issues, and it's disingenuous. I mean, it's absurd, but I guess it works, so people do it. People are somehow convinced that, you know, Jill Stein, practicing physician, lifelong, peace activist, is and environmental activist, is somehow, you know, has ties to Russia. I mean, it's absurd. It's really, but we, you know, people are susceptible to less than rational ways of thinking. We are, you know, imperfect beings. We do our best to arrive at the truth through logic and evidence, but we look for shortcuts. Our emotions influence our thinking. Fear influences our thinking. And people who want to influence our thinking, you know, people who make commercials and people who are running for office, will use every trick in the book to try and influence how we vote. And you have to clear away a lot of that nonsense and look at the issues and vote for what you really believe in. And, you know, I'm so tired of politics being about nothing. It's like Seinfeld, the show about nothing. It's like it's almost like our politics is only about who's winning, who's losing, who's worse. Like, the discussion of actual policy is really lacking in our political discourse, and I do think that, again, I come back to the two-party system as being largely responsible for that, because it doesn't challenge you to think too deeply about issues. It only challenges you to give, you know, okay, here's two things, pick the one you dislike less. And it's infantilizing us. It's dumbing things down for us in a way that doesn't challenge us to think, doesn't require us to peer too deep in the issues. And then they just need something to push you one way or the other. You know, they just need some emotional influence. Well, this person is, you know, a liberal who's gonna take away your guns, you know, or, you know, this person is you know, I mean, not that there aren't legitimate issues that sometimes will be used, but a lot of times it's illegitimate stuff. Like, yeah, this person's a Russian asset. I mean, that's just baloney, and it's sad that that can be the quality of our political discourse sometimes. And if we have multiple candidates running an election, people have to think a little bit more carefully. Like, they have ranked choice voting in Maine, and so the Green Party had a candidate, Lisa Savage, and people would put up signs in their yard like, rank Lisa first, and rank the Democrat second. I'm blanking on her name right now. But it encourages people to think, it challenges people to try and be more discerning, to try and, if there's just two choices and there's one issue that is enough to tip you in one direction, that's all they need. Once they've got your vote, they're going to go do whatever they want to do. They're going to take the rest of your opinions for granted. But in a multi-party system, they have to really try and work harder to persuade you to earn your vote. And it can't just be, my opponent is the Antichrist.
Thanks again, folks, for watching. Again, to see the full interview, please go to rockfin.com/Primo Radical and sign up to become a premium member. There are new episodes of Uncensored coming out every single week. So don't miss out. Head over to rockfin.com/Primo Radical and sign up to become a premium member.